Inshallah. Yes.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. We have about an hour together to ask a very dynamic question, which is how can leaders bring about lasting transformation in African agricultural and food security? This question is critical not only for Africa, but for the world. It was declared a couple of years ago that we are in a post-surplus world. That means that we're in a very tight situation in global food markets while we're facing increased demand and the prediction that by 2050 the world will need 50% more food. This leads me to the conclusion that the world cannot feed itself without the African farmer, and the potential and the opportunity is really quite ripe now for transformation and partnerships on agriculture with Africa. Let us remember, as I often point out, that tomorrow 1 billion people in the world will wake up and not know how to fill even this one cup with food. So 1 out of 7 people on earth. And let us also remember that everyone has to eat. So the fundamentals of this opportunity are very clear, and also the compelling nature for all of humanity. The fact is that 60% of the potential for increased agricultural production in the world is in Africa. And so we will explore this issue. I will give just a brief report from the Grow Africa Day held yesterday at the African Union. This is a dynamic partnership that was launched in discussions throughout Africa, but really bringing together a multi-stakeholder platform of the African Unions, the nations of Africa. 7 nations in particular have really led this: business leaders, entrepreneurs, international organizations, farmers, civil society, to really problem solve in a dynamic way and to explore the issues that are blocking the potential for the growth and the including of the African farmer in these opportunities. So one goal that was really explored yesterday is how do we nurture partnerships and an enabling environment for financing for Africa's economic and agricultural transformation. And the principles that this partnership has put forward, Grow Africa, are very clear, that it's African-led and African-owned, particularly through CAADP, which has helped nations develop investment plans and NEPAD, that it be multi-stakeholder, that it be market-based, that it be sustainable, and that it be transparent, and that it be agile and non-bureaucratic. And so yesterday we were honored with the presence of the 2 heads of state here and also President Kagame of Rwanda. We had the chairperson of the African Union, over 60 companies there, 7 nations presenting plans of action, and we had to turn away over 100 people who wanted to come to this. Next week, this will be brought up by the G8. I don't know if Raj Shah is here, but we'll hear a little bit of that if he is, and really put forward as a new way to work together to see these visions realized. I will now turn to our very distinguished panel, and first to Prime Minister Meles Zenawi of Ethiopia, our host here. You have seen quite a transformation in the agriculture of Ethiopia. In fact, I think you had the highest production ever last year, even despite very severe weather conditions. What are the keys that have enabled that to happen, and what's your vision going forward?
Well, as everyone knows, more than 70% of the population of Africa and something close to 85% of the population in Ethiopia live in the rural areas based on subsistence, smallholder agriculture. So the key to food security, to economic development, social and political stability is the transformation of small-scale farming, smallholder farming. Our focus has been on small-scale transformation of small-scale farming. The African Union has set a benchmark of about 10% of budget of each country to be allocated to agriculture. We've done a bit better. We allocate something like 16% of our budget for agricultural development. We provided extensive extension service, developed our rural infrastructure, started overhauling our marketing network, and input markets. And as a result, we're beginning to see results. The results vary from region to region in our country. The outcome has not been as spectacular in the pastoralist areas, and so we have had to develop a special program for the pastoralist areas. But in the other areas, the outcome has been quite good. So that's one of the legs of our transformation strategy for agriculture. The other one is the involvement of the private sector, both in terms of investment in intensive agriculture, horticulture, flowers, and also extensive farming. We have attracted quite a sizable number of companies into the flower industry, for example, in Ethiopia. These farms create jobs. It's difficult to have one family living on 1 hectare of land. But the flower farm would employ about 20 people per hectare. So it's more intensive than smallholder farmers. So we have had quite a bit of that, and that's had very positive results. We have also had investments in large-scale farming. A while ago, the Minister of Agriculture of Saudi Arabia was here with a big delegation of Saudi investors interested in investment in agriculture. So we have had Saudi investment in large-scale farming, Indian investment in large-scale farming, and others. So these two legs combined and helping each other, they do not need to develop in parallel. They can help each other. I'll give you 1 or 2 examples. Pepsi Cola, together with your former institution, the World Food Program, have invested in the processing of our chickpeas to provide supplementary feeding for food insecure people. I believe this is the one that you have produced. And we hope to export this to drought and emergency affected areas instead of raw chickpea being exported abroad. Diageo, one of the breweries, was recently invested in Ethiopia, is working with small-scale farmers to produce malt for their breweries and process the product of small-scale farmers to add value. We are also working on adding value to our sesame. And so the large private sector and the small holder farmers can move not only in parallel, but can intersect where it makes sense. The large private sector can add value and create opportunities for the small-scale farmer. These are the approaches that we have chosen for our agricultural transformation program.
Well, that commitment with the 16% and also the reaching out to partners has really evidenced some big results. President Kikwete, I was very impressed with the tone set by the heads of state yesterday, and the 7 nations, the ministers, finance minister, agricultural ministers, they were clear. Grow Africa is not a talk shop. It's not a bureaucracy shop. It's a roll up the sleeves, problem solving, get down to business, transformation shop. You have seen some of that dynamism really changing the face of poverty in Tanzania. Can you talk about how you're doing that?
Well, I don't know if there is anything more that we can say than what I said yesterday. Well, of course, as I said, we have been trying to transform this agriculture. You know, as I said, many people depend on it. Many people are poor because productivity is low. So we've been trying to see what is it that we do. Of course, the number one thing has been how do we transform the peasant farmer, or rather the smallholder farmer, to become a commercial farmer. Not necessarily with grand scale, but increase productivity so that he moves from subsistence, he generates a surplus, and this surplus makes him improve his living, but also at the same time ensure food security. But we are talking of very poor farmers. If you want them to have access to modern scientific science and technology in agricultural production and animal husbandry, they cannot afford it. So the issue really is how do you support these farmers so that they would be able to do irrigation, to get seeds, to get fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides. And that's where we see government role as being critical. And if we've always been trying to aim at getting to the 10% budgetary allocation as specified under CADAP. But then we realized that even 10% of the budget of a poor country like Tanzania cannot do much. So that's where we also look forward to support from our development partners. And that's why what we were saying yesterday, that we need to encourage donors to come back to the levels of 20 years ago. When 20 years the support for agriculture was 18 billion, but now it's only 6 billion. So if we can encourage donors to come back. Of course, I think through the World Economic Forum and a number of initiatives that we have taken to encourage the growth of agriculture, we are seeing a lot of interest now, increased interest. But again, you need something to happen that would also touch the hearts and minds of the donor community. I think the food crisis, which affected all of us, I think was an awakening call. So now we see the World Bank coming back. I remember when we had TICAD in Tokyo, in Japan, and Bob Zorek was president of the World Bank then, coming up with initiatives and expressing readiness to assist us. And then the L'Aquila initiative where there was serious discussion about assisting Africa. So I also see that governments have a role to assist farmers, but also we are seeing the donors have a role because we are not that rich. Because when we say 10% of our budget, that's close to 2 billion Tanzanian shillings. It's about $1 billion probably, and that is not much in a country of 42 million people. So that's the first thing that we see: support to the smallholder farmer, help him transform from subsistence to commercial farmer. The second thing that we realized was important is to increase government investments or investments in agricultural research to develop the seeds, to develop the fertilizers, the herbicides, the pesticides, but also to develop the tools that will be appropriate for the kind of soils in our country. I visited all the agricultural research institutions and I discovered there wasn't much that has been done. So I took a deliberate action to take a decision that at least 1% of the government budget must be allocated to agricultural research. We started that 2 years ago, and it has started to help. I think already they have sent about 200 of their scientists now for master's and PhD studies, which is critical for research institutions. And then, of course, we had to to invest, of course, in rehabilitation of these research institutions. We have now allocated money. At least now every research institution will have at least 2 research projects every year supported so that they can do agricultural research. I found this to be quite critical. Then, of course, the third thing, or of course the other thing which I took a decision, there's some human rights activists may accuse me, because I found that most of the scientists have reached retirement age. I just gave an order that they will not retire. But I said retirement is a luxury for you. Until the time when you get too old, you mix research for cashew nuts, the genes for cashew nut and maize, you start mixing, then we said, okay, fine, go and take care of grandchildren. But because, we don't have enough scientists, and those who are there have reached retirement age. The third thing that we looked at was the whole aspect of markets for farmers. You may invest in inputs, productivity may increase, but the buyers are not very kind to farmers. They just undercut prices to the extent that these poor farmers will remain poor if we did not take measures to protect them, to help them. So we've been grappling with what is it that we can do. We looked at warehouse receipt systems, and this morning I visited the Ethiopia commodity market. You've done a tremendous job, my brother. A tremendous job, and there is a wonderful lady there. They are great people. Big brains are there. So we want to emulate that, because we've been working on developing a commodity exchange so that we can protect farmers, because they are undercutted by the reckless and cruel buyers who don't care about the lives of farmers. So this is also important, because if farmers get an assured market and they get good prices, you encourage them to do more, but at the same time they earn more. They'll definitely make a good living out of it, and the rest of us will be assured of food security. Of course, the other thing is to encourage the private sector to also work with the government, work with the smallholder farmer. First, we want the private sector to help produce or make sure that the inputs that farmers require are available in the country. If they can produce them there locally, fine. If they can't produce them there locally, but at least import them into the country so that they can be. So the measures that we take to support farmers, subsidize farmers, or ensure that there are financial mechanisms, then the inputs will be readily available there. So this is something that we've been trying to do, and of course through that we came up with programs locally. With the I chair the Tanzania National Business Council, which brings together the government and the private sector. And in one of our meetings, we devoted discussion to agriculture growth. And that's where we formed a joint team between the government and the private sector to look into what needs to be done to ensure that we accelerate the pace of transformation of our agriculture. Out of this, we came up with the famous phrase, Kilimo Kwanza, that is agriculture first. And we looked at ways of involving the private sector in agriculture. So one of the things is that let them provide the inputs, produce them or bring them so that the farmers can easily access them. But also look at creating financial mechanisms so that farmers can access loans and use these loans to buy fertilizers, seeds, because instead of being overly dependent on government subsidies, which at some point we may not be able to do. Of course, I also encourage the private sector also to engage in agricultural production. let them become the large-scale producers. Because we have land that we have set aside for large-scale production. Let them take up that land, they grow crops, keep livestock, so that at the end of the day, so we are seeing that involvement. But later we came with, after at the WEF in Dar es Salaam, where we extended this participation from local also to involve the international private sector. And through this involvement of the international private sector, then it evolved until we came to the Grow Africa initiative, where now we are looking at broadly how we involve the private sector to help in transforming Africa's agriculture. Of course, the last thing that I would like to mention is we also encourage agro-processing, because we cannot continue to be primary producers. We grow mangoes for export, and people make juice concentrate and then export the juice for us to consume. Why shouldn't we do that? The whole value chain, complete the whole process, and then just export the juice. Why should we export cotton and then buy cotton shirts from Britain or from China? And people say that a kilo of cotton produces 2 shirts. So why should we export all these jobs? Why should we export all this value? Why can't we get to the process where we have the cotton and produce our own? So we are looking at and this again is where we also want to see the private sector also involved. Establish the agro-processing industries locally so that we complete them. Of course, there are functions of the government to also look at infrastructure support and all other support to the agriculture sector. So what I'm saying is, I believe these are some of the things that we've been doing, and hopefully if we will be able to implement our objectives, I'm sure the African agriculture in Tanzania will be transformed. The smallholder farmer will become more prosperous, will become a commercial farmer, production will increase, we'll have more food. Of course, incomes of farmers will increase, and therefore they will have helped in alleviating poverty, and also will produce a food for the rest of the world. Well, sorry, I spoke at great length, but we wanted me to share what we have been doing. This is what, in a nutshell, we've been trying to do in the country.
Well, thank you, and quite a hopeful message, but quite an urgent message. After this first round of comments, we're going to go to the floor. We'll take about 5 questions, come back to the panel, and hopefully, and Bob Geldorf, I'm going to go to you first, if you don't mind. You've been studying this for a long time, so I want to hear what you think about the next stages. Dr. Balham, your leadership during the food crisis in 2008 was very vital to ensuring that we saw the alleviation of suffering around the world. The King stepped in to ensure 2 billion meals were sent to people in need, but also Saudi Arabia really put its weight behind long-term solutions. You've been visiting Africa. Let's look to the future, and do you see a potential for win-win partnerships between Africa and Saudi Arabia, and what do you see as the next steps in that? And again, thank you for your leadership during that most difficult time.
Thank you very much, Josette, for your kind words, and I can also assure you that the custodian of the 2 holy mosques, King Abdullah, appreciated very much your personal effort and your pivotal role in your previous capacity in the World Food Program, and your novel approaches to fighting poverty. And I can assure you he still appreciates your world-renowned Red Cup next to you. Thank you very much, Josette. If you allow me, I would say that the relationship between Arabia generally and Saudi Arabia specifically and Africa is deeply rooted. It's not a recent relationship. It's a relationship we in Saudi Arabia cherish very much. I think that there were mechanisms that happened in Saudi Arabia, whereby a decision has been taken by the government to give priority to water security over food security of local production. And that is why we decided in Saudi Arabia to phase out our growing of wheat, of locally produced wheat. So by 2016, the government will not buy locally produced wheat. We did this at a time when there is high spikes of food prices. In this sense, His Majesty King Abdullah decided to take an initiative to encourage the private sector to go out globally and participate in increasing food production globally. Now, what we noticed also is that everybody knows so many books and reports have been written about Africa and the potential, the huge potential in Africa. What has become very clear to everybody now is that there is a consensus in the African leadership. It is very clear now that African leadership has a clear vision that agriculture is probably the most important vehicle for development in Africa. We in Saudi Arabia share this vision, and we offer our partnership on an equal basis, and we will be very happy and proud to be partners with Africa in the development of Africa. This will bring prosperity, hopefully, to Africa, and will also help us in Saudi Arabia to protect our food security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And your attendance, all three of these leaders, at the Grow Africa session yesterday was very vital. Zain Abdullah, Pepsi is all about supply chains. It's probably more relevant to ask, is there any place in Africa where you're not running supply chains? And I know you work through a lot of local suppliers, local bottlers. What works and what doesn't? And what types of improvements would you like to see to increase business in Africa?
Thanks, Josette. I think I'll just start off by saying, as one of the largest food and beverage companies in the world, and on behalf of the multinational food and beverage industry, that getting agriculture right in Africa is crucial. It's crucial on many levels. I mean, first of all, it's the most important ingredient in what we make is agricultural products. It drives the cost and quality of our operations. So Africa really engaging in the global supply chain on agricultural products is critical to us. The second reason, obviously, Africa with its very fast economic growth is a very interesting consumer market for many multinational companies. And therefore being able to build their business models out through local agricultural supply chains is critical. But I would add a third that's quite often overlooked, which is that we fundamentally believe that if Africa comes into the agricultural supply chain, it will increase the nutritional value. Because there are many more diverse crops that can come from Africa compared to those intensively farmed in other parts of the world in terms of fruits, vegetables, and higher nutritional component products. The key to success, though, as we look at supply chains across the world, and this is both challenging and particularly true for Africa, is to address the value chain holistically. It's not to look at single components of it, like how can you improve seeds or how can you improve production, but you have to go from seed to marketplace. And we fundamentally believe that if you do that and you actually start with the marketplace, you solve for it in a more transformational way than just improving the efficiency component by component. So start with the marketplace, work your way back through to the seed, but address every chain. What is your production capacity? What are your yields? What's your harvesting regime? Storage capability? How do you process? How do you add value to that product in the local community? And how do you actually get it into consumers' hands? You have to solve for all of those things to drive a transformational approach. And we believe that if you do that, that's where you add the most economic value, both in total, but perhaps most importantly, how you add the most economic value locally. And again, that's of primary interest to companies because building out the domestic market is critical because it builds out the consumer base. I think the second thing I'd turn my attention to as we look at supply chains is it's very important as we look at Africa that we both engage, integrate, and win with the smallholder farmer. That is going to be the magic of this, is how do we, I think Mr. Annan referred to it in the morning, drive an AND game, not just bring or look to large-scale solutions, but make sure that the smallholder farmer is engaged. Because again, building economic wealth in the local communities adds to the prosperity. And again builds out the consumer base. I'd just like to touch very briefly on the product that Prime Minister Meles showed, which although a different nature, it's a relief feeding product. Actually, this product breaks some of the old paradigms of we can only rely on Africa for the ingredient, but we then have to ship that thousands of kilometers to be processed into a finished product. That product is produced holistically here in Ethiopia, starting with indigenous chickpeas right the way through to the product that's used in the feeding program. That was done in partnership between ourselves, USAID, the World Food Programme, the government of Ethiopia, very importantly, and of course the farming community of Ethiopia. But it is transformational, and I hope that really sets the pace for how these products are going to be produced in the future, and that Africa really solves its own problems and delivers its own supply chain on these products. The final thing I'd just say is that if we're going to engage the smallholder farmer and win with a smallholder farmer, then capacity in the agricultural system from a skills and capability building point of view is crucial. Because we're talking about not just reaching a handful of farms, not even tens of thousands of farmers, but literally hundreds of thousands of farmers. And one of the initiatives that we're looking at now in partnership with Stellenbosch University and with two universities here in Ethiopia is how do we get an agricultural education program off the ground that really builds much more focus and much more accelerated skills and capability building in the agricultural sphere. Because I think that will also help address a couple of other issues that I've heard talked a lot about, which is the gender diversity. How do we include much more women in the solution of this equation? Again, we can do that through this educational program. And secondly, how do we engage youth? Because again, through the education program, we can ensure that youth are engaged in thinking through the solutions across the whole value chain. So those would be the thoughts from a PepsiCo perspective.
Excellent. Zain, I know that your father was a farmer in Sudan. I know Barry's father was a farmer in Brazil. We may have other farming families here, but Daimon Chibongo, you're the only one representing the voice of the farmer here today. We know you're based in Malawi, but probably many of the lessons you've learned about how smallholder farmers can be competitive apply even more broadly. But let me ask you this, because I've heard in hundreds of meetings that smallholders can't be competitive. So can you take that on?
Thank you so much. The fact that I'm here representing smallholder farmers, sharing the platform with such distinguished people, means that smallholder farmers can make a difference. And the majority of the producers in Africa are smallholder farmers. In the case of Malawi, most of them are working on less than 2 hectares of land. And the miracle that we've been speaking about in Malawi has not been from the big estates. It has been from the same smallholder farmers producing enough maize not only to feed ourselves, but also to feed the neighboring countries in time of their need. But what is crucial is that smallholder farmers need to be mobilized, need to be organized. My own association, the National Smallholder Farmers Association of Malawi, has the motto that says the future belongs to the organized. And we believe that because smallholder farmers are fragmented, they are spread out in the most remote parts, if they are not collectively organized and helped to build their capacity to govern themselves, to produce and to market, then nothing can be achieved. For that to work, it needs good leadership in terms of our political leaders. I believe it is Hillary Clinton who said that politicians think about the next election and statesmen think about the next generation. So what I would appeal to our political leaders is that after the campaign is over and you're in government, stop being politicians and be statesmen. In case of Africa, the CADIP is a landmark document, policy, that should be domesticated by each African country to make sure that what is in there is being applied, because it's not one size that fits all. The Malawi subsidy program, for example, or support program, as we heard from President Obasanjo yesterday, cannot be duplicated across Africa en masse. It has to be domesticated country by country. And if countries are really meeting the minimum of 10% in agriculture, then they will help smallholder farmers to be able to produce not only for themselves but for the market. What is crucial is that the research and development that is being done, the insurance products that are being worked out, the financing, and so on, cannot be done to individual smallholder farmers. They need to be done to a collective of smallholder farmers, whether they're in clubs, whether they're in associations, whether they're cooperatives. I know in certain countries cooperatives have got a very bad name because of previous abuses and misuse of authority, but they need to be mobilized into collective action groups. In that way, they can be able to access inputs together, they get cheaper rates, they get transported to site, and so on. So smallholder farmers are a productive entity that is a sleeping giant in Africa. That sleeping giant needs to be woken up and can only be done through mobilization into collective action groups. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to do a quick poll of the audience here. You can go back 2 generations, your parents and your grandparents. How many of you come from farming families? Raise your hands. Now you can go back 2 generations. How many of you have an active story of hunger in your family history over the past 2 generations? Agriculture touches us all.
Absolutely.
And Daiborn, you have, let me ask, how many of you believe smallholder farmers can be competitive and that any model should look at including them in the future of progress for Africa?
All of us.
Okay, very convincing, and you get 2 votes there. Okay, Barry Martin, all of this requires money. And more often than I hear that smallholders can't be competitive, but we've just laid that to rest here, I hear farmers are too risky to invest in. But Rabobank has done extensive business. So why do you see it differently? And what are you doing differently? And how can we be sure that the massive amounts of finance, not a step change, but a paradigm change in financing for Africa's farmers can happen?
Well, thank you. First, I would like to say that yesterday, the ones that didn't go to the Grow Africa Summit really missed something. It was great. And it's a change, really a change. So also thanking the leaders to be there. Why rural financing? I'm already 20 years in rural financing. And I have to tell you, in rural financing, I only lost money with big projects, with big companies. I've never lost. Our losses on a global basis, we do this in more than 20 countries as Rabobank. We actually don't lose money with medium-sized and small farmers. We lose with the big projects, with the very pharaonic projects. Why Rabobank is in this space? We actually are a cooperative bank. Our founders, 110 years ago, they were farmers. And still Rabobank is run by the farmers in the Netherlands. You have to imagine, 110 years ago, Europe had famine. So that's why I raised my hand. My parents went to Brazil because they had nothing to eat. So you have to imagine that we really know what it takes to bring the farming community into, I would say, successful production. Actually, it starts with the proper financing of the whole supply chain. It's not only the financing of a farmer, of a smallholder, of a medium, of a commercial farmer. If any part of the supply chain doesn't get the proper financing, the whole thing breaks. If you cannot finance after you have produced, you have the record production, you don't have any place where to store it. Storage, you can have the best maize production, but the only ones having a party are the rats because you don't have place to store it. It's just the issue. So the whole supply chain has to be properly financed. How do you properly finance the supply chain? Actually, in my view, and the view of Rabobank, it starts with having a proper financial framework in your country. A financial framework starts, you have to develop a proper transactional banking structure. Well, Africa is doing a great job, especially through the mobile banking. You do have to develop a strong savings business, open up branches, teach people how to do savings. Once you have the savings, you can do the proper financing of the supply chain. And the last, and I think it's the most important, you have to make people not only literate about how they do their cropping, but you also have to teach people, farmers, how to be literate about their financing. You have to show everybody in supply chain and the farmers what is a budget, what is cash flow, what is long-term financing, what is short-term financing, and how to deal with that. And that is what I mean by proper financing. And that's actually the commitment which we have as Rabobank in coming to Africa and under the Grow Africa project to do this proper financing of the whole supply chain. Let me also add one more thing. I am very happy to hear about the organization. The reason why we see on a global basis small farmers actually being extremely productive and extremely successful is that they organize themselves. Look, it's clear that if you only have 1 hectare and you need to buy a tractor or a very big irrigation system, it's not going to work. But if you come together in a cooperative, and the cooperative can get the skills, the financing skills, and also the financial management skills to organize around that technology, it's going to be successful. And we have seen that globally. So I would like to take away the myth that small farmers are risky. What's risky is not knowing what you're doing. Your organization has to know that farming has good years and that farming has bad years. It's unpredictable. It's just unpredictable. You know, you can have 8 tons production one year and you have 2 tons production the next year. You could have 3 tons. It's just unpredictable. So proper financing, the right schemes to understanding that you will have a good year one year, a bad year the next one, and be ready for it. So you have to have equity in there and you have to look at it. So that would be my message. It's just you have to understand it. You have to do the right thing and you have to give people the knowledge what is financing about, the knowledge of money. Money is very emotional, but money is also very rational.
Thank you. I'm going to do another snap poll. How many in the room feel that within the next 50 years, Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, can be a net exporter of food? Wow.
Except that I would change that, not 50 years, but 20 years.
I'm going to work down. I'm going to work down here. We're going to work down and see how many we lose. 20 years?
Some countries.
In aggregate?
Yes.
Some countries.
Okay. 10 years?
I would think of 10 years. 10 years is possible.
Should I stop there?
Yeah.
Fair enough, okay. Sir Geldorf, you've been at the hunger issue. You inspired me. What's on your mind today? And we're going to go to 5 questions, hopefully about a minute each, because we have a half an hour. Amazing. And we'll keep coming back. And Eleni, we have to hear from you at some point. Do we have a mic here?
Thanks, Josette. We should be aware perhaps of an element of complacency entering the argument. I mean, it is fundamental that this forum focuses on agriculture. It is the basis for all the rest of the success story that's happened and will continue to happen. But the reality is that between 1750 and 1960, world population increased 8 times and arable land increased 8 times to meet that need. Between 1960 and today, world population increased 80%, but arable land increased 5 times. At the 2050 point, we need 70% more arable land than we have today. It doesn't look doable, save cutting down rainforests, and that implies all sorts of other stuff. 70% of all water usage is used for agriculture. So how do we make these elements combine to a happy ending? Right at the moment, I think it's not so sure. 200 million people in Africa today are food insecure. A third of the children in West Africa, I can't remember the figures for East Africa, but what we do know is that it impairs growth and it impairs cognition. And if you are malnourished up to the age of 2, you will be 1/3 cognitively impaired for the rest of your life. This is a fundamental problem for the growth of this region. So, Prime Minister Meles and President Kikwete, you'll be in Camp David next week for the G8. I'd like to know, what will you say to President Obama at the G8? What do you think will happen there? What will you bring to the summit in Malawi? And what is your judgment on the promises made on agriculture 3 years ago at L'Aquila?
Thank you. And that's 4 questions, and very good ones. Let's take a few more, and then we'll go back to our leaders and to the panel here. Sir, and if you could identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Edwin Machari. I'm a partner at Dalba Global Development Advisors. We're a strategy consulting firm. My question actually goes to everybody on the panel, including you, Josette. Every transformative idea was at some point a crazy idea, was at some point something that somebody thought was too radical, no way it could happen. Would be great to hear from the panelists as well yourself, and Bob, please chime in. What's your crazy idea now that you mutter to yourself in the middle of the night and say, I wish somebody could do that? Fully taking advantage of the different people we have in the room, innovators, entrepreneurs, financiers, governments, and so on and so forth, and see if we can get an energy behind a crazy idea that actually has a chance of transforming agriculture over the next 10 years to reach the goals that we said we would.
Great challenge for the panel. The woman here, and then you, and then we'll come back, and then we'll go back to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ndidi Wuneli. I'm the co-founder of Ace Foods. It's an agro-processing company in Nigeria. And my question follows up from what Mr. Abdallah said, and I resonate with a lot of what you've said about the value chains. But from my own personal experience in agro-processing, I see that there are 2 problems that still need to be addressed. The first one is a policy problem. What we see is that a lot of the large food companies, food processing companies in West Africa, import almost all the food that they use for their processing. And we've challenged them to start sourcing locally, like you said. There's a mindset issue, which they say, well, it's too difficult. Why should I bother going all the way to the farmer? The second is that there's no policy incentive to do it. And so I'm advocating something called a National Food Contents Bill, which says if you cannot find a local alternative that is high quality and affordable, then source abroad. But if you can, source locally. And I think the challenge for the presidents in the room and the people on the stage is what can we do to encourage people? Because we process, but people prefer to import. They say, why should I buy yours? It's better, it's cheaper from Indonesia, or it's better, but it's a mindset issue. So I think the policy issue and the mindset issue needs to go together. And I'm challenging you to do more. It's not enough to just talk about it. We actually need to create incentives, tax incentives, or other incentives for companies to actually source locally where they can find good quality alternatives. Thank you.
Go ahead. Sir?
Hi, Adam Green. I'm a reporter for This Is Africa magazine. I have a question for Prime Minister Meles. To what extent is the agricultural transformation strategy geared to stemming high rates of rural to urban migration in Ethiopia?
Okay. We're going to go back to the panel, and Elena, I'm going to have you kick off the next round here. Mr. Prime Minister, G8 agenda, crazy idea, tax incentives, migration. You have a few to pick from there.
Let me start with Bob's questions. And if anybody needs proof that as people grow old, they mellow, then this crazy Irish is a living one. This is the first time I heard him where he has been politically correct from beginning to end. So, welcome at last. $20 billion were promised in L'Aquila in terms of cash. And the G8 also promised to base their development efforts in agriculture in Africa on Africa's own program, the CADAP. These were the two main achievements of L'Aquila. And I'm sure you know the L'Aquila initiative was initiated by by Barack Obama, who was then, this was his first meeting as a president of the United States. So, which one of these promises have been kept, and to what extent? Understandably, the $20 billion has not appeared. I think we are in the range of maybe 25–30% in terms of new additional money. And that, by international standards, is not really bad. So I would take that as half partially achieved. The most important departure of the L'Aquila initiative has been that whatever money was made available on the basis of CAADP. Each country was expected to develop its so-called CAADP compact, and the funding would come on the basis of that compact. So that's the new thing about this L'Aquila initiative. Now, what do we expect at Camp David? 2 or 3 things. First, to bring in the private sector into agriculture, but to do so on terms of the small-scale farmer. It's not just these village traders who can be very vicious. Some large-scale farms, as part of their supply chain, can have a long-term stunting effect on the small-scale farmer unless it's properly managed. And I'm very happy that the small-scale farmers representative in this panel has raised a taboo issue. Taboo from the point of view of policy orthodoxy that's been imposed on this continent. And that is the farmers should not be organized. If they are organized, there will be chaos. So let the private sector do the aggregation of products from small-scale farmer, the distribution of everything to small-scale farmer. That, of course, is, I will not use one of your choice words, but that, I think, is inaccurate. There have been disasters related to farmers' associations, cooperatives, and so on. But there have been disasters in everything, including in drinking Pepsi, for that matter. So when you overdo it or misuse it, everything, including medicine, can be bad. But that does not mean you don't take medicine. It means that you take it properly and you learn the lessons. So I hope that in Washington, together with the G8, we will be able to define a compact with the private sector and the public sector for foreign private sector to come in and invest in Africa in a responsible manner, environmentally responsible, socially responsible, and engaging with the small-scale farmer on the basis and terms of the small-scale farmer, including his right to organize, her right to organize. That is one of my hopes. The second thing is, and President Kikwete was right, if you're really going to transform agriculture quickly, you need to invest. And the resources at our disposal are not really adequate. 16%, 10%. We're talking about percentages of peanuts. So we need additional resources. That doesn't mean that we have exhausted our own resources, because our biggest resource is not public budget. Our biggest resource is voluntary labor contribution of the small-scale farmer to change his livelihood. That's billions of dollars. If we can organize and engage the small-scale farmer to do the rural roads, to do some of the environmental protection work, to do some of the irrigation work. We can do a lot with the limited resources outside of the public budget. And we can do things cheaply. We don't need, every time we want to build a rural school, we hire a consultant. That increased the cost of the school by 100%. And there's an international competitive bidding and all the rest of it. If we could organize small-scale farmers and young people in the rural areas to do the infrastructure, including the building of the schools, we can do more with less. But it can only go so far. So there is always a need for additional input. And we hope in Camp David, the G8 will come up with money and will be more honest than usual in the promises they make. We usually have a very steep discount rate when we are told that this amount of money is coming your way. We have a very high discount rate. I hope they will help us to reduce the discount rate. In Lilongwe, in Malawi, when we meet for the AU summit, we will be reporting to the summit on the G8 meeting, of course, and the implementation of CADAP, this agricultural development program, and also Grow Africa, with which President Kikwete is very intimately associated, and see if we can scale up what is being done in some countries, scale up within countries and among African countries. That will be the main issue for me as far as agriculture in Lilongwe is concerned.
Do you want us to come back on the crazy idea? You can, or you already have it?
The crazy idea, in my view, is that the biggest source of poverty in Africa, in the rural areas, is not money, is not technology, it's organization and ideas. It's organization and strategy. If you have the right organization and the right strategy with less money and technology that's already available to the small-scale farmer, I think miracles can be done. But that obviously is a crazy idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. The organization and strategy deficit, very important. President Kikwete, G8, and your crazy idea or any of the other questions you want to take on?
Well, I think my brother here has said it all. Well, we've been invited. The first thing we want to listen is to those who have invited us. But of course, what is encouraging is that the G8 wants to discuss Africa's food security and nutrition as a major theme for discussion. And then, of course, we hear they're going to make commitments on how to support our initiatives. That's a welcome thing. Because as Prime Minister Meles has said, in L'Aquila there was commitment. Not much money has been delivered. Hopefully this time around, we're going to get the reassurance that what will be committed this time will be delivered. Because if that is done, then it complements our efforts. As Prime Minister Meles has said, we can't do much. We can't do everything because of so many competing needs. And as such, with meager resources, you have to share them for education, for health, even for health, maternal health, HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, other non-communicable diseases, rural infrastructure, the road in the main infrastructure, the railways, the airports, the ports. There is so much that we need to do, and we don't have all the resources that we need. So certainly when we get support, it's something that we always welcome. But of course, it should be support to support our policies, to support our programs. So if we get there, then I think we'll have met our expectations. Again, we're going to discuss the participation of the private sector. As I said, we welcome the participation of the private sector. We've been trying, all countries in Africa have been trying. We have investment centers, we are doing a lot of road shows to promote investment, but we're not getting much. We're not getting much because we need the leaders, that be, in the developed countries, to also encourage their private sector to come and invest in Africa. So at this meeting, if all the leaders of the G8 are going to pronounce themselves that we encourage you to go and invest in Africa, work with African leaders, work with African peasants, work with African people to develop agriculture, I'm sure we're going to get a more positive response than myself or Prime Minister Meles going to Chicago or Minnesota, addressing the agricultural community there. Come and invest, it's good, there is a lot of land, the climate is good. Now that at least the leaders themselves have taken upon themselves to encourage their private sector to come and invest in Africa in agriculture or in agricultural support services, I'm sure this time around we may be able to be successful. So this is our expectation. Well, to the crazy idea, well, as Prime Minister Meles has said, well, he made reference to a lot of brain, a lot of expertise gathered here. If all that expertise gathered here is really committed to transforming agriculture in Africa, it can happen tomorrow. So let's, all of us, crazy as we are now, use all the expertise we have, all the experience we have, support the smallholder farmer, increase productivity, modernize his agriculture, his or her agriculture. Tomorrow, it's not only going to be a crazy idea, but very crazy things will happen, because overnight, Africa will become not only food self-sufficient, but Africa will be the exporter of food to the rest of the world. And the majority of the people whom we are grappling with to help wrestle them from poverty, lift them from abject poverty, that objective will have been achieved. So let's work on the crazy ideas, but let's, all the crazy guys are gathered here, let's work together. For the African peasant farmer, we'll get the results.
Excellent. Mr. Minister, if I could ask you, we had a question about the types of incentives governments can put in place to encourage things to happen. We know Saudi Arabia has had to tackle challenges like fresh water, access to food. Any thoughts you have on that, and any crazy ideas you have, we welcome.
Well, I must say I'm extremely fortunate to be in the company of some heads of state, of governments here, and I know I'm not, so I have to be very careful and watch what I say. But I think it is extremely difficult to expect private sector to be pushed into an investment. We really have to work very hard to lure the private sector. And the best way to lure the private sector is to really have a transparent environment for investment. Clear judiciary system. And once you have that, believe me, business communities will fight to come into Africa. And I have no doubt about this. I know that I'm here representing an investing country. And I am proud to be in that capacity. And I can clearly convey the feeling of our private community. They clearly state that they are very much interested in investment, because these are people, like all business people in the world, these are people who have money, and usually money is made to make more money. And you cannot make more money by sitting in your country or in your home or whatever. You really have to venture out. And we have capital which is ready to venture out. So this is why in my first intervention I stated very clearly that we feel very optimistic about the clarity that African leadership is putting very, very clear vision now. And I salute what the African leadership is doing. And as I said before, we are very much willing to be part of the effort of Africa. I don't know whether I answer your question or not.
No, yes.
Thank you.
Now, we only have 6 minutes. And what I'm going to do is, Eleni, if you have a 1-minute question, we'll take one more. We're going to come back and we'll start with all of you, and then we'll finish with, so you'll have to take all the previous questions in addition to 2 more. So the mother of the Commodity Exchange of Ethiopia, Eleni, do we have a mic? And on this side of the room, okay.
Thank you, Josette. You have put me on the spot. I want to reflect and ask a question about what essentially we should start thinking of as the new agriculture for a new Africa. So very quickly, what is that new Africa? The new Africa is largely young people. It's a mobile, connected, tech-savvy Africa that we see emerging, and it's largely an entrepreneurial Africa emerging. Our young people don't think of becoming civil servants. They want to start businesses. They want to be individuals. They're atomistic. They're a bit chaotic compared to our previous decades. So a new agriculture for this new Africa is going to have to be oriented to a much more market-oriented, private sector-driven, young, tech-savvy agricultural transformation. So my question to the august panel is, are we ready? Are we organizing our development paradigm in agriculture to be not so much program or project oriented, but deal brokering and idea incubating minded? Because I think that increasingly the Ministry of Agriculture is not the interlocutor for agricultural dialogue or agricultural development. It is a broader consortium that includes industry, telecommunications, energy, and foreign direct investment. So we need to be organized as development practitioners, as governments, to really create a much more ideas-oriented, in line with the comments made a minute ago, to foster that kind of innovation. It's much more chaotic than simply taking on one program or one project. It's really fostering an environment which breeds innovation, which encourages creativity and individual entrepreneurship. So my question, or rather challenge, is that there are many, many crazy ideas. A few years ago, one such crazy idea was that a country like Ethiopia could set up a world-class commodity exchange. I believe there are thousands of better ideas in the minds of young Africans all over this continent that will transform the continent. So are we ready to let that chaotic process of incubated ideas foster and grow? Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And a short question here. Identify yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Tamrat, and I am...
We can't hear.
My name is Tamrat, and I'm an editor for a local paper called Fortune. And my question will be to the two heads of state, and forgive me if I'm not going to ask a crazy question. The question is, we see a lot more an increasing enthusiasm by international investors to come and invest in Africa and in agriculture. And I'm wondering to what you attribute this increased interest by international investors that have been shying away from Africa for so long. There are two hypotheses. One is that the situation in Africa is improving in terms of political governance, political stability. But on the other hand, there is this thinking that due to pressure on global population and food insecurity, countries like Saudi Arabia and India, China, Turkey are pushed more and more to find fertile ground particularly in Africa. And to which do you attribute? And if you have something else, I'd be happy to hear that. But most importantly, there is a growing resentment in Africa, which is by African homegrown private sector, that African governments are not giving as much incentive and attention for investment by indigenous domestic African investment because they're being perceived that they're giving a lot more advantage to foreign companies at the expense of local companies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, very good question, and that Grow Africa platform has many African businesses, very key, that African entrepreneurs and businesses are very central to all of this. Zain, we're going to start with you. We'll go through and then come back to our leaders of government to speak of this. So,
okay, well, two quick thoughts. One on the innovation and youth engagement. To be honest, I think you largely actually answered the question you posed, which is how do you think holistically? So go across every aspect where you can add value in the chain. Take a very entrepreneurial mindset to it. The thing I'd add to what you said, though, is engage the educational establishments. I mean, we really do need PhD, we need MBA programs, really scientific programs that can assist in creating the right framework for this. And we need much, much more capacity in that if we're going to culturally transform some of the traditional paradigms. The second thing, just for pure interest, I'd love to launch a crazy idea. This one is because I'm an engineer by training, so I'll take a much more practical, sort of technical idea. And it came to me, a phone call I got from my younger brother who'd just come back from South Sudan, and he was telling me how much, because we both love mangoes, and he was saying that he bought a big sack of mangoes for less than 50 cents. And it was because he just paid 50 cents to some kids to go and collect them from the trees because they were lying rotting on the ground. So my crazy idea is let's get a group of technical people together to develop a factory in the back of a lorry that can drive around these plantations and can actually process and store the fruit pulp and the nutrients in an aseptic, safe way. Now, it sounds crazy because how do you get the energy to it? How do you store it? How do you handle bulk? Because you have to compress. But if we can put a man on the moon, we can certainly put a fruit processing plant in the back of a lorry. And you know, if we can do that, Bob, I tell you, we don't need GMO and we don't need all of these things to improve output. All we need to do to get that 70% extra capacity is to stop the spoilage, and then in partnership with that, get African yields up to Asian yields up to European yields, and we really can feed the world.
excellent. We're just about out of time. Dyborn?
Thank you. In terms of policy, indeed, many African countries have policies that do not encourage domestic investment, and that needs to change. In terms of crazy ideas, two. One on regional integration. I have a crazy idea that in 5 years, the Cape to Cairo will become a reality. That I'll be able to leave Malawi and go to any part of Africa without having to apply 30 days in advance for you to get a visa. And to get to any part of Africa without having to go to Europe first before you go to a certain part of Africa. The second crazy idea is that the hand hoe, which is used in agriculture in Africa, will be declared within 5 years a weapon of mass migration. Our youth are leaving the countryside. They don't do agriculture because agriculture is back-breaking work by using that hand hoe. That the technologies that have been developed will actually be applied so that youth can be attracted to go into agriculture and that our women can be released so that they can do more household work, nutrition for their families, and they can even engage in small-scale businesses because their time has been freed up instead of working from day to night in the fields. Thank you.
Say it, Dyborn. Barry?
So I only will tell crazy ideas. Let's say one crazy idea would be that all African countries will be part of Grow Africa. No?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
No, we only have 7 now, still a lot of room to go. And the second crazy idea is that within 10 years we have a lot of young female farmers driving their high-tech tractors, doing all their financing on their mobile phones, getting all the information from the stock exchange, and not negotiating a bag of corn, but negotiating with the supply chain for the one that pays her the most for every hectare.
Well, I would just like to close with one crazy idea, which is that we end child stunting in our lifetime. We know how to do it. Children need micronutrients. They're all in this package. Ethiopian chickpeas, a few other ingredients, micronutrients. These protect the child's brain. And any base crop in Africa can be turned into a powered pack. You don't have to add water. You don't have to refrigerate it. Tastes great. Squeeze it in a kid's mouth. But African-based solutions to ensure that the brains and bodies of kids, these are business opportunities. We're not talking charity here. We're talking about opportunity to develop the next generation of food for Africa and agriculture. I'm sorry for taking the chair of the session prerogative to have the last word, but thank you. Thank you, our leaders, and thank you to the audience. Let's dream big. And I will just leave you with Einstein's statement that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So unless every day, that's my goal, we're doing things differently and urgently, we're going to get the same results, so let's act different. Thank you.